I'm Isabella Livorni, and I teach here in the Italian department, and I'm very excited to present our first event of the series this year. First of all, though, I have a lot of people to thank. I want to thank Stefano Albertini back there, and the Casa team, and also Julian Sachs, who might be in the back there, who has really helped us so much with scheduling and setup and tech. I want to thank the Department of Italian Studies here at NYU, everyone who has shown up, our grad students, our faculty, thank you, and also especially our chair, Eugenio Refini, who is giving us space to do this series, our administrators, Julie Canziani and Osame Gunes. I also want to thank, in particular, Emilio Tamburini, our grad student who really helped invite Gianpaolo here for this talk, and Clifton Boyd from the music department for participating also as a respondent. Thank you to my students who have shown up. I'm very excited to see you all here. And then to the man of the hour, Gianpaolo Chiriacò. Thank you so much, and I will present him in a minute with his bio. But first, just an overview of the series. So the series, titled Race, Migration, Italy, is a series of events, book discussions, theatrical performances, film screenings, lectures, sponsored by Casa Italiana Zerilli-marimò in collaboration with NYU's Department of Italian Studies. It aims to promote conversations on the intersections of race and migration in Italy and in Italian diasporic communities. Conceived in connection with courses taught in the Department of Italian Studies, Race Migration Italy revisits the format launched by Casa Italiana's virtual salons, Discourses in Black Italia, which was held virtually during the pandemic. So we bring together artists and scholars in order to address questions about race and racialization across Italian history and multifaceted geography. So thank you all for coming. So our event today, our talk today, given by Gianpaolo Chiriacò. Gianpaolo works as a researcher at the Archive for Popular Music Studies, the University of Innsbruck, where he also teaches history of jazz and popular music. After a 3-year experience at the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago, Chiriacò has conducted extensive research into the intersections of music and blackness in Italy. He published several articles related to the history of popular music within the Italian colonial enterprise, and he is the author of the audiovisual project Listening to Italian Colonialism. And I think you'll speak a bit about that today. Great. And also, I'm just very excited to have him here. So, round of applause. Thank you all so much.
So, during the pandemic, as I was thinking about this project, Listening to Italian Colonialism, I ran across the speech that Nilam Srivastava gave right here at Casa Italiana on Italian colonialism and resistance to empire. And I remember saying to myself, wouldn't it be cool to present Listening to Italian Colonialism here at Casa Italiana? So this is just to say that I'm extremely, extremely grateful, especially to Emilio and Isabella for having me here. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you, Clifton. I really look forward to your feedback. The research I'm going to present today is part of a bigger project. I've been working on this for a few years, and basically deal with the main question of how can we look at the Italian colonial experience from the point of view of music. I work mainly with popular music at so-called non-classical, non-Western world art music, so everything that is not that. And yeah, I just work with the question. Another way I can say that is, how can we listen to the Italian colonial experience today? So part of my work, I work on field recordings that have been made by Italians during the occupation. I work on musicians who were in Italy during the 60s and in the 70s from Ethiopia and Eritrea. I work on music teachers and musicians from Italy who were in Ethiopia after the occupation. I look at this project from different angles, but there is something that has been sort of a constant in my work, and this constant is the songs I'm going to talk about today, and we are going to listen a little bit together. Those are the songs that have been published, I should say composed, published, recorded, broadcasted, performed right before the start of the so-called Second Italo-Ethiopian War, during the war and after the war in the time of the 5 years of occupation. So and again, how do we listen to these songs today? So I'm going to make a lot of different points today, but to present the main points are going to be, first of all, I think we should listen to these songs very carefully. We need to think about these songs as complex cultural products that need to be analyzed, as this analysis will often provide connections with other cultural products of the time, connections to social dynamics, to historical trajectories, and so on and so forth. The second point I want to make is that we need a collective re-elaboration of these songs. And here I am really much influenced by what writer and journalist Gianpaolo wrote, which is, she actually was talking about one song. We will talk about this song later, but I took the liberty to make her point about this old repertoire. I think she would agree. Anyway, through a close analysis of this repertoire, not the song, the repertoire, one could deconstruct the text, decolonize the minds, take the fascism out of society, and finally educate our politics, which has made the other the scapegoat par excellence, responsible of all evil. To be able to talk about it calmly will be a really big step forward, a step forward for this Italy that rarely looks at itself. And this is basically what I do with the project Listening to Italian Colonialism, working towards a collective re-elaboration of those songs. The third point is that usually, or we should say, these songs as an entirety has been sort of forgotten. They are not in the Italian sonosphere anymore, apart from a couple of them. Nevertheless, the echo can still be heard. Both the musical elements and the textual elements, the textual components, have reverberated in Italian music and Italian society. And most of all, it is the approach to blackness that these songs describe and present and represent that can still be tracked down and discussed in contemporary Italy. Now, it is the time to listen to some musical excerpt. And we start from the title, Fiore del Tigray. It was a song published toward the end of the 1936. We have the very young trio Lescano. There are three artists. They were born in Holland by an Hungarian father and a Dutch mother. They were artists. They arrived in Italy very young. And they were starting their very successful career at that time. So they were not there yet, but they had the chance to publish and to have a release with Pippo Barsizza, who was a famous musical director at that time and conductor. And there was and the Orchestra Cetra, basically the most famous, the most prominent orchestra at that time, and was published by the Parlophone. So it was already at a very high level of Italian musical system. And so with no further ado, I want to listen to part of this song together, and then we'll talk about that. can stop it here. There is a typical example of their lyrical style, the way they were singing in harmony, and sometimes have a very peculiar pronunciation at the point that sometimes it's even impossible to understand what they are saying. But there are two elements that I think are very significant here when one reflects the presentation of the Ethiopian woman in these songs, of the Fiora del Tigray. She's a flower, and the singer acts as somebody who is trying to counsel her. They want to show empathy, but it is also an empathy that comes from the top, somehow from the point of view of whiteness, I guess we can say. This is even more evident when somebody look at the record as an object. At that time, they were all 78 RPM, so there was a song on one side, another song on the flip side. And in that case, we saw it on the page of Radio Corriere at the beginning. In that case, on the flip side, there is a song, Bel Moretto. There was also composed musically, orchestrated musically by Pippo Barsizza. And here we have also a young figure from, they don't say exactly where, like Fiora del Tigray, but we can assume that he's also from Ethiopia. In this case, he's a young boy. And this identification with the sort of process of infantilization get to the point that the trio Lescano acts or sing as they were his mother. Let me see, where is it? All right. So, se lo vorrai, figlio mio, tu sarai. I want to listen together with you one more example, just an excerpt of another song of that time. Again, Pippo Barsizza is involved. There is the orchestra Cetra, and in this case, Vincenzo Capponi is the singer. Vincenzo Capponi also worked with the trio Lescano in some occasion. What we see again is this idea of the woman as a flower.
Nuovo fiore, fior d'oltremar, fate splendor, sapremo dar, noi porteremo alle tue terre senza pace, il segno ardente di romana civiltà, noi ti saprem difendere con larghi fuori il cuore, l'abbiam giurato innanzi al duce vincitore e al re Sabato dell'Etiopia imperatore. I piccoli moretti verso i nuovi loro destini marceranno volentieri.
And you see also at the end of this partial excerpt that I created, we see again the people who are young, the little people. This process of infantilization that it is in this in these songs, it is very common. But it is also something that appears more clearly in the time in which these songs that we listened to were published. So after the declaration of the empire, to the point that you can actually identify a moment in this huge group of music in which, before, just to give some very, very basic information, so the occupation was prepared the year and the months before, but it started officially in October 1935, and then the war went on until May 1936, and then the occupation started. And you see this sort of thing is actually reflected in these groups of songs, because before the declaration of the empire, the moment in which Mussolini gets to Palazzo Venezia and says that Italy finally has the empire. Before the declaration, the text of the song tends to present an offensive mockery of the Ethiopian man on one hand, and on the other hand, an over-sexualization of the Ethiopian woman. After that, the process of extreme infantilization of description like fiore and again, these ideas of looking from the perspective up above is very much prominent after that, and we will see that it remains in the Italian society stronger than what it comes before that. I leave you with this idea of infantilization. We will come back after that. I want to talk a little bit about the musical structure of these songs that we just heard, specifically Fiore del Tigray. The song is presented as a fox and is arranged as very much inspired by the swing, the American swing that was in the radio here at pretty much the same time, just started a few years before. So sort of like you can see some Benny Goodman kind of approach, and this is even more strong, so more easy to detect in another version of the same song that was published without lyrics, again with Pippo Barsizza directing his orchestra. And so the presence of jazz is actually signaling an important element in these songs, because it's sort of like part of these songs were contributing to a process of Italianizing the musical styles that were coming from abroad, in this case, jazz. So the idea is that also in music, Italy was supposed to be independent. They were supposed to get to a sonic autarkia, we can say. And these songs were really much part of it. So the idea was making Italian, and the occupation of Ethiopia was basically giving a field, a frame, because it was giving the possibility to talk about exoticism, to be a little bit more innovative, and was also based on dance, and also dance were part of this musical system. So somehow we can say that this fascination with Ethiopia was also contributing to the development of jazz in Italy at the time. And they were young musicians, but very, very talented. And also the radio was young at the time, just 10 years old. The media of records was also very, very, very young. So it was a whole process that was very much influenced by these songs. And to the point that I kind of like to think about these songs as an Italian version of Timpanelli, so something, a system that was giving the possibility to express creativity. And this allows me also to make an important point. So oftentimes you see these songs described as silly songs, something that is not even worth it to think about, something that should be forgotten. But at the same time, they were contributing to the building of canzone italiana and of Italian music. So, and we saw very professional musicians participating. I like this picture just because you see Barsizza with other composers and with Giulio Razzi, who was very prominent, was the director of EIAR, and then after the war also arrived for many, many years. And it was, again, a system, and somehow it's very, very well described also by Anna Harwell Celenza in her book about Italian jazz. She makes the argument that Italian jazz was, or jazz in Italy is often described as something that was opposed by the fascist regime, but in fact, Italian jazz flourished until the end of World War II because Mussolini supported it. And when it was executed, many Italian musicians began rewriting their own stories in an effort to forget the uneasy relationship that they have forged with fascist policies and practices. And you see this very much present in these songs. Now, I want to also reflect a little bit with you how I've been talking about these songs as these songs, but how can we describe them? historically or musicology has often said, okay, those are just inni e marcette. That's the popular music during the 1930s in Italy. And we already saw that this definition tends to make this repertoire too little and too unoffensive and too marginal from my perspective. So what are other definitions? Colonial songs is definitely a possibility, but when you talk about colonial songs, then you have to think about also the songs that were published at the time in which Italy was fighting for Libya. Viva gli Ascari was a famous song at that time. Also the songs that were published in the 1890s when Italy was trying to occupy Ethiopia for the first time. Africanella was a famous song at that time. So colonial songs, too broad, I would say. At that time, they were presented on Radio Corriere, so the official newspaper of national broadcasting, as canzoni d'attualità. Again, probably a translation from novelty songs, right? Canzoni d'attualità was very much defining, especially those songs that were contributing to narrate, to chronicle the occupation. There's a song about Adwa, there's a song about Makale, there is a song about Ambalagi, and then they are really sort of like explaining how the army is moving toward Addis Ababa. And one definition that I decided to use for this project is defining the songs Ethiopian repertoire of 1930 popular music. And the reason why I like to think about this as an Ethiopian repertoire is because somehow with all the despicable aspects, the violence, the mockery, the insults, and the over-sexualization of Abyssinian women, still there was a sort of like attempt to understand what this Ethiopia was at the time in which the emotional involvement, as La Banca defines it, was very, very part of the colonial enterprise, of the colonial endeavor. So now that I said how I like to call them, I am gonna present a sort of taxonomy, a little categorizations that I created on the website of this project. And I decided to use only the songs that were published, that were recorded and published. And we already count more than 120 songs in a very limited amount of time. So again, it was ubiquitous at the time. This repertoire was definitely ubiquitous. And I tried to create some categories related to the musical styles and to the main themes. So these are the songs, for example, the songs that talk about the black female body. Some of them are like, I can just say, Cioccolatino or Il Bottone del Legionario. They are very heavy in the sense that it's very violent the ways that they are presented. There are also some other that are more nuanced. And so another category is the one about exoticism. I wrote an article about it, and I was noticing that mainly when it comes to the exoticism, there are two musical forms. One is dance, and probably this is quite obvious, and the other one is the canzone, especially a canzone with tenor. People like Carlo Buti, Crivel, Fernando Orlandis at that time were very, very famous singers who were involved in this repertoire, and together with orchestras like Cetra and an orchestra from Pippo Bersizza, they were building foundations, we can say, to what later became the classical version of Italian songs, meaning Sanremo. And by the way, some of the musicians and the composers and the songwriter involved in the creation of this repertoire actually won Sanremo, and they were very, very active in that too. Here you see a very long list of songs that are directly pointing at the emperor, the Ethiopian emperor, Haile Selassie, making fun of him, insulting him, maybe in kind of different ways to go against him. There is a passage in the recent novel from Masa Mengiste, The Shadow King, in which she imagines the emperor being somehow touched by those songs. I don't know if this is true, but it's interesting the way she puts it in her novel. You see here a lot of also traditional forms. There were songs in the form of stornelli. Serenata a Selassie is a very famous song within this group, we can say, created by Ea Mario, the person who wrote La Leggenda del Piave, among many other songs. We can go on. Here I put the songs that are more specifically about racial stereotypes. Of course, there are also songs that come with different themes, right? This is also the idea. But you also see many different ways, musical ways, to interpret these songs. And this is, again, to the point that you cannot just push these songs to a side and say, oh, they were all inni and marcette. They were not. There were hymns, of course, like Adua, somehow very basic marches like Ti saluto, vado in Abissinia, that was actually the song that the fascist regime wanted to use as the main song. It didn't work out, though. There are songs about the international sanctions. The propaganda at the time was really going against the UK and Society of Nations, Società delle Nazioni. One person that was writing most of these songs was Rodolfo De Angelis, who was a prominent intellectual, performer, composer, songwriter, very active in theatrical songs, very active in café chantant, but was also instrumental in the creation of the Discoteca de Stato in Italy, so the main audio and audiovisual archive even today. Of course, there are songs about the colonial experience that try to rethink about what happened before and represent, for example, Adua as something that we were able to take as a revenge, as though Adua was first on the first place. The experience of the soldier is also very common because, again, these songs were chronicling and they were somehow telling the families, the wives, the mothers, the fathers, and the children what the Italian army was doing at that time, right? And then there is more the experience of the Italian army in Ethiopia, so more like official songs. And of course, you will see more hymns and marches exactly in this category. So again, now that I presented this repertoire, I go to the second point of my presentation, which is the collective re-elaboration. Like I said, I thought about this project called Listening to Italian Colonialism. There is a link over here where you can see the different audiovisual episodes. It was at the time of the pandemic, so we did interviews online. And the idea was, okay, how can we use these songs to reflect on representation of blackness today, to reflect on the life of Afro-Italians, migrants, and racialized people, more generally speaking. And Emilio Tamburini was part of the project. Alessandra Ferlito, a researcher and art curator, was also part of the project. And I want to show you a little selection of the videos. The videos were thought in a way that you could listen to the song, read the words of the text, and then follow the discussion. So let me just play a little bit. I will stop every once in a while to give you some more information.
Marcano i reggimenti nell'Africa laggiù, cassa l'Italia il fiore di gioventù. Quante camicie nere che vanno per portare tutta la fiamma nuova di civiltà. L'aria d'una canzone fa la truppa marciare ed ogni cuore cantare. Fior d'Abissinia, bel fiore, africanella, all'ombra del tricolore sarai più bella. L'Italia nostra nuova patria per te sarà, che ti proteggerà. L'ardente fiamma d'amore, africanella, la schiavitù del tuo cuore spezzar saprà. E la canzone grido di libertà.
Bene. Sai qual è il primo problema? Il problema che ho io con tutto questo grandissimo repertorio di canzoni di epoca fascista, legate, insomma, di propaganda, legate che parlino di corpi femminili, che parlino di conquista, che parlino di tutto quanto insieme, e che le hanno fatte in modo così orecchiabile che ti restano in testa, cioè è difficile proprio, è difficile arrabbiarsi.
Gianpaolo is an artist and a scholar. She's been a musician. She's a film director as well. And one point that she makes in the video. So the idea, like I said, was also to create conversations, right? And one point that she made in the video is that the infantilization of which we talked about, she was experiencing in a way that when sometimes people were extremely kind with her, as a way she makes a parallel with a sort of a missionary attitude, she was also feeling like that that approach was sort of too much, sort of like too extreme. And she talked about that. I thought it was interesting, connected to the song that we heard together.
Venisti incontro a noi, gambette nere, dall'ampe, dalle alture desolate, correndo già vi sentivate fiere di essere protette e liberate. Guardandovi gambette deliziose, pensammo dolcemente a tante cose, gambette nere di bambole brune, punti legate con ferro e con fune, vi ha liberate l'Italia bella ed or ballate la tarantella. Gambette nere ma quelle dei maschi, gambette di dei giacche generali, che solo nel vedere i nostri caschi voi fuggivate e mettevate le ali, guardandovi fuggire nei perigli ci sembravate gambe di conigli, gambette nere di poveri grulli, che per noi altri eravate trastulli, voi fuggivate affondando nel fango e la paura vi insegnava il tango. Gambette nere di poveri grulli, che per noi altri eravate trastulli, voi fuggivate affondando nel fango e la paura vi insegnava il tango. Gambette nere da scari eritrei, che marciavate verso la vittoria per vendicare chi nel 96 cadde trafitto avvolto dalla gloria, guardandovi avanzar nella battaglia voi sfidavate il fuoco e la mitraglia. Gambette nere veloci e sicure, non temavate insidie e paure, entraste prime nella capitale, marciando al ritmo di marcia reale. Gambette nere veloci e sicure, non temevate insidie e paure, entraste prime nella capitale, marciando al ritmo di marcia reale.
Il testo è molto interessante e leggendolo mi sono accorto che c'era un filo conduttore. Secondo me questo filo conduttore, che poi è suggerito anche dal titolo, è il corpo, cioè la relazione al corpo e la percezione del corpo. La padronanza del corpo diventa una chiave per la dominazione. Sono delle istantanee, ogni strofa la vedo proprio come un'istantanea del corpo dei colonizzati. All'inizio abbiamo questi corpi che proprio si gettano sulle braccia del colono provvidenziale, il colonizzatore provvidenziale. Cioè qui sono tre parti fondamentalmente. Alla fine di ogni parte c'è questa relazione al ballo sistemato e organizzato, cioè si parte dal disordine razionale all'inizio della strofa, ogni volta è così, al ballo, quindi le donne che scendono dall'altura in modo di disordine, poi arrivano e ballano una tarantella. Quindi c'è la presenza provinciale del colono e l'ossessione del corpo femminile come oggetto sessuale a disposizione del colonizzatore.
Zamo is a musician, and later on he explains his own take on this song as a black male, a black man in Italy. He says, I often feel like there are just two possibilities for me to be. One is the bunny, the fearful person who cannot really think, or the other representation is the one in which I can be strong and proud insofar I accept to dance the marcia reale, insofar I accept to obey to all the rules. And I found it really interesting. There is one more excerpt, but I invite you to watch everything online. But I just want to mention the ways in which Fiori Berane, who is a scholar, a professor, who did a wonderful project in the Italian system of accoglienza, and we listened together the song Te porto in Italia, where actually the song says exactly that, like it refers to an Ethiopian woman and says, I'll take you to Italy, where you can eat panettone, you can eat vongole, and you can eat pizza, and I'll even go and talk to your mom, and sort of like she underlines the ways in which the song and this hospitable Italian approach actually conceals some sort of, or like conceals a very violent approach. And she made the relationship of this discourse system, this discourse mechanism, with the centri d'accoglienza in Italy, where, the word is accoglienza, and we talk about the system of accoglienza, but actually is the level of control is extremely high, and actually we see the development of the violent approach to sistema dell'accoglienza in these very days. Again, if you are interested, you can listen more, you can watch more on the website. I'm going to go ahead and reflect a bit about the imperialist echo of colonial songs, right? This is the title, part of the title that I used. And I want to start with what Giacomo De Marzi wrote in his book about I canti del fascismo. He said fascism, at least within his songs, did not wish to appear imperialistic, this is to say eager to obtain political dominance, but rather imperial, representative of a moral supremacy and spreader of new civilizations. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this distinction, because I think the one is functional, it's instrumental to the other, to the political dominance, which is the main goal anyway. But what I wanted to highlight is that this representation of moral supremacy and this idea of civilization is really much present in these songs, and somehow really defines how the songs still reverberate in the Italian society. And of course, we can talk about songs after the end of World War II, after the end of the Ethiopian occupation and then World War II, that still deal with the presence of, that still present stereotypes of Italian popular music. Iva Tussi is a great example. Felice Liperi, who recently wrote a book about these songs, and the book, he talks about the songs, the song called Ti chiami Africa, published by Enzo Avallone in 1980. And of course, there is also the use of these stereotypes in more sarcastic, ironic kind of ways. But to use David's word, even when there is an obvious use of sarcasm, stereotypes about Africa have managed to persist, apparently unchallenged, in Italian popular culture as the weight of factual evidence against them increases, not least to the direct contact many Italian people now have with migrants from Central Africa and their children. And my take on that is that there is obviously a strong persistence of the stereotype, but there is also a sort of resistance in the way we talk about that, about representations and about songs, a sort of resistance against a deep understanding of the long history of connections. And part of this resistance is based on the refusal to look at the complexity of cultural productions like these songs. Now, what I'm thinking about is that often when I talk about these songs, people feel offended. Maybe somebody in this audience feel offended today, and I'm sorry about that. But I still think that we should, specifically we in the Italian society, we should sort of like try to go over this feeling of being offended, because this can operate as a sort of a safeguard of the European imagination rather than allowing for a communal understanding. So again, I think we should continue to talk about these songs. Now, I want to go toward the end. Like I said at the beginning, I was saying that many of these songs have been forgotten, apart from a few one, and of course, Faccetta Nera is the main example of the song, maybe the only song that remained in the Italian sonosphere. Should we sing it? Should we listen to it? Or should we go on? Because the time, I see that the time is...
We have time.
Okay, good,
About
great.
Five more minutes.
Okay, so for those of you who doesn't know the song, who don't know the song, we can listen to it. With an accordion, with a fisarmonica, is not the most famous song, just to signal that in a few months there were more than 70 versions of these songs, of this song, this specific song, and was just one of them. And the song was created in 1935 by two persons who were really, really involved in the Italian musical system at that time, and they continued to be involved also after this period. And somehow my assumption is that it became so famous because somehow it encompasses all the different elements that I was describing when we look at the songs as a repertoire. Somehow they found the right combination of them. And the songs were really everywhere at the time. There was a transmedial presence of the songs in movies, in postcards. I guess one is like this, in postcards. There are many narratives that remind how the song was actually motivation for the soldier to go and fight and look for their own faccetta nera. There are chronicles of the song and how the song was interpreted by the soldiers on the battle during the campaign, and how the song was also sung in school. But the song then, after May 1936, just because the song was definitely presenting an idea of black beauty, was encouraging the approach to that beauty, the song was actually sort of like banned or stigmatized. We can talk about that later. But somehow this is consistent with what I was telling at the beginning, right? The change in the perspective after the declaration of the empire, to the point that actually there was a story that came right at that time after the declaration of the empire. They said, well, the song was not about a young woman. The song was about a young girl, 2 years old, who was found after the Battle of Amba Alagi, one of the most violent battle of the campaign, and was found by Italian soldiers and saved by Italian soldiers. And then they sent her in Asmara to study at one of a religious school over there. And that became the true story of Faccetta Nera, just to give you a little bit of how also the meanings changed. Then the song remained in the, even though it was banned, remained in the sonic memory, in the oral traditions. We have many different versions of the same song with different lyrics. Maybe we'll talk about it. We are trying to write a book together with Valentina Fusari, who is an historian of the Horn of Africa, actually, also to give a cultural history of how the song also functioned in the Ethiopian territories and in the colonies more broadly. And this is also a very interesting part. But anyway, the song sort of became an idea of how, at the end of the day, the Italian colonialism was gentle, right? We were there, but we were singing Faccetta Nera, sort of like that. 1982, Enzo Biagi, one of the most famous Italian journalists, used Faccetta Nera for one of his episode of his show about history. And then Faccetta Nera ran into a different process because it became the dirty secret of alt-right, sort of like the unofficial hymn of the new extreme right, fascist movements. And the song became something that was despicable. Everybody knew about that, but nobody should talk about that. It's still like that today. Maybe you heard some news. I just wanted to give you an example. In 2011, a school professor in middle school in Italy was actually attacked by parents because he tried to present this song as a way to reflect on Italian history. And the parents went to the police and to the media. And it was a huge scandal in Italy. And there are many, many examples of this scandal. And, you know, what happened, my take, or the take that we are taking with Valentina is that what happened is that in the 1980s, why change the idea and perception and meaning of Faccetta Nera? In the 1980s, census for the first time showed the presence of migrants from the African country, Italy. And simultaneously, the racial conflict clearly emerged, as, for example, in the assassination of Jerry Maslow and the consequent riots in Castel Volturno. And at this point, the Faccetta Nera found itself at the center of a political discussion. It was sort of like somehow epitomized the discussion around migration and around the whiteness, the pursued and presumed whiteness of Italy, to the point that I remember, but maybe I will tell you during the Q&A about that. I was going to tell a little personal story. But I want to conclude and say the reason why me and Valentina want to write a book about entangled histories related to Faccetta Nera, the reason why, the motivations behind listening to Italian colonialism, the reason why I insist that these songs need to be heard, need to be analyzed, need to be understood, is that because the songs are there in the sonosphere, in the musical memory. I hope I gave you enough proofs about that. And they are there to remind us that the exotic interest and the fastest wish to conquer actually shaped a distinctive way to construct race, and this way can still be identified in contemporary Italy. So I think that critical listening can therefore allow for critical understanding of these processes. And I want to conclude with the word from Zamora, again, from the project Listening to Italian Colonialism. Zamora said that the sonic memory is part of what happens, and it can explain many things of what is happening today. We should keep talking about it. It will also be interesting to reuse these songs in a different musical fashion. Are we trying to do it? Maybe. Maybe we should do more. To remake, change them, maybe deconstruct them. Music has the ability to create and support social structures, but it can also unhinge them. It can also destroy them. One can use the same song one can use these songs upside down. And I hope we can do that together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Gianpaolo, and thank you, Caterina's just going to set up our chairs here. Appreciate it. And so I wanted to present, after this excellent talk, I wanted to present our respondents. So we have, as I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. Clifton Boyd is an assistant professor in the Department of Music here at NYU. He works primarily on issues of racial identity, politics, and social justice in American popular music, and is completing a monograph on barbershop quartet singing and racial segregation during the Jim Crow era. But he is also in the early stages of a second research project on black music in Italy after fascism. Emilio Tamburini, can you raise your hand, Emilio, is a Ph.D. student at the Department of Italian Studies and in the program of Culture and Media at NYU. His research, based on the practice of film and sound ethnography, focuses on migrant cultures and the right to the city in contemporary Italy. So, welcoming our respondents to the chairs, and Gianpaolo, you can also Sì, come volete, se volete. Sì, mettili al centro, Gianpaolo.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a preference, Emilio? Would you like to start, or?
As you want.
Okay. Yeah, I don't mind. I'll just get into it. So yeah, thank you so much for a super rich and interesting talk. It's I've been hearing Emilio and Isabella talk about this for several months now, so it's really great to kind of see the fruit of their labor and to see your presentation. And as a musicologist and a music theorist, it's also really nice to see your attention to the musical, to the sonic elements, and also like there's more research these days, of course, on race and blackness in Italy, but not much of that has crossed over into the realm of thinking about Italian musical culture. So it's really nice to see the work that you're doing in this area. I'm going to try to keep my remarks pretty brief, but to speak a little bit about the work that I've been doing lately that I think has interesting connections to what you're doing, is that lately I've been thinking about, since I'm trained primarily as an Americanist, I'm thinking a lot about Black Americans, and then as I'm thinking about the Italian context, I've been thinking lately about Black Americans who have gone to Italy. And it's interesting that you mentioned Sanremo, because I'm very curious about your thoughts on La Canzone Italiana and the identity that Italy was seeking to produce, I guess less like during the 1930s, but more kind of like post-war, like 50s and 60s, or at least that's what I've been thinking about these days. And as you were referencing Anna Harwell Celenza's book, and either in that book or in a different article that she writes, she speaks about as accepted as jazz was during the interwar period and during the war. After that, there was a lot of like musical segregation going on. I mean, one thing I'm thinking about that she writes about is the International Jazz Festival in Sanremo that was active in like the 50s and 60s. And so you have like Sanremo as an event kind of like working to preserve Italian song, and then you have this other space where like a lot of like extremely famous Black jazz musicians are also performing like different time of the year, but there's not too much overlap until like the mid 60s when the organizer of Sanremo was looking to make the festival more international. So yeah, so just your comments earlier about kind of like Italy looking to take jazz music and make their own version and kind of say like we can do everything in-house sort of, but then by the 60s they recognize that they need these Black musicians, primarily Black American musicians, to bolster their music industry, which they think, they want to increase sales and all those sorts of things. And then also another really interesting point that I think connects well is all of the discussion surrounding like the Black body, like as it concerns male artists. I've seen like Wilson Pickett, who was a very popular artist in the 60s, was spoken a lot about for his physicality. So it wasn't like sexual, but it was kind of like he was this consummate performer who has so much energy on stage, and there was a lot of focus on this physicality, and then there were also a lot of these Black American women and also Black women from the UK. I'm thinking mainly of like Shirley Bassey and Eartha Kitt, 1968, who were sexualized in very similar ways as you were describing in your work. And even though they're not kind of like drawn from this like, you know, Italian colonial context, like still their blackness is marking them in such a way that they're seen as hypersexual in ways that are seen as in opposition to Italian culture. So so yeah, there's definitely more that I can say about that. But I think to try to wrap up here, you were getting at this towards the end with your quote from Zamua, from, if I had that correct, this idea of what can be done with this music today, or how it can be like refashioned or repurposed and things like that. And I'm really curious because you're doing this work on the sounds of colonialism, Italian colonialism, and with so much going on with like La Seconda Generazione, like, you know, these Black Italians who are not, well, that's one thing I'm curious about. Like, are there any Black Italian musicians that you know of that are like interacting with this music in a way that's kind of like trying to reinterpret it, or do you kind of view that as the next step? For musicians that are active today, that are making commentary, you know, one of the big topics, of course, is like citizenship law, you know, things that are looking for rights. And yeah, so I guess I'm just kind of wondering, as we think about the legacy of all of this, what Black Italian musical interventions are you witnessing that are happening that are, in response to all of this? Yeah.
Great. Put a pin in that, and now we're going to go to Emilio, and then we'll give you some time to respond.
Sounds good. All right.
Okay, thank you so much for this amazing talk. It's super exciting to me to hear you talk about this project here after having followed some of its earlier steps around Italy and very much online for a while during the pandemic. And so, yeah, I have a few comments, maybe a question. When you found this archive, when you find this collection into the Central Archive in Rome, we can say I think it was pretty much a place of forgetting, in the sense that oftentimes the archive preserves a memory that is very much internal, but that the rest of society sort of forgets, and that was the case for this collection. And I think it's relevant. It's what is crucial here to me is that you, from the very beginning, you didn't want to just like do cultural history about these songs, even though that's a very exciting part of it. But it's been from the beginning about reactivating it, and you very much shown that. You've shown how you also basically prepare tools for others to use it and to start conversations. And I really hope none of your students or students' parents will call the police on you for this activity. But so it's very much about listening and not only about studying. And studying is a practice, but listening is a practice in itself. And oftentimes in post-colonial studies, listening to voices as a practice, as a metaphor, is used to talk about subaltern voices, right? Is the attempt? It's always to try to listen to the voices of marginalized subjects in the archive. That is the case for anthropological archives. At least the archives I've been studying before this one. And so something that is fascinating to me is that these voices here, there is absolutely no space here for the voice of the subaltern, but there are voices, and so the exercise of listening is like is listening to the substitution of voice, to the obliteration of voice, and that's something that it's disturbing. It can be disturbing, and as you said, these songs are not just about fascism. And maybe is this the reason why they are so disturbing? Is it because they are also so much about dance and joy, leisure? There is a specificity to this, like, cultural industry that I think is very close to has been close to the daily experience of Italians, to their free time. It's the sounds through which, like, Italians became acquainted with, like, jazz, and people learned to dance these things. So if it's something you want to elaborate on, yeah. And I have other questions, but I can wait.
Yeah. Should I go? So first of all, thanks a lot for the precious comments and the question. I'm just going to elaborate very shortly so that then we can open up the floor. Zamo is, for example, somebody we did together in Innsbruck sort of an exhibition with all the videos of listening to Italian colonialism. In the presentation, it was particularly brilliant. And we talked about using the songs, but the never arrived to a point. You know, of course, I don't want to be the person who pushed it, right? I'm here to diffuse, to recirculate. I'm definitely not the person. Already recirculate might be problematic, but I'm definitely not the person who is going to use the songs musically. We had a conversation in Rome at Spazio Griot. You know, this association is very active, and there are some musicians around that. We had a presentation. Karima 2G was there, and we thought about it. There was a rapper, I don't remember the name on top of my head, but he's a rapper who was famous for a song about citizenship, because he was a rapper and a famous cook, or a successful cook, but he didn't have any citizenship. So he often talked about it, especially in his songs. And he was mesmerized by the presentation. He really said, I wanted to use it, but never happened. Spazio Griot, actually, the person in Spazio Griot, Joanne, is actually now involved with the American Academy in Rome, and she said she would like to do something. But again, I'm concerned about making the songs part of our discussion. I'm not going to be the person who makes the song something musical new. I will not even know where to start, and I don't want to push it. But yeah, I think we have now a process to bring these videos to schools, and maybe something will come out from schools, maybe with kids from different backgrounds. I would love that too, but is nothing really happened. Even though it happens to me to work with musicians of African descent, or have just arrived to Italy in the last 10 years, but yet I'm not presenting these songs as something that we can use. They might want it, but I'm not doing that. In terms of the archive, you are really you're right. This is an archive that has been forgotten. Part of it is because even though the Istituto Centrale per i Beni Sonori Audiovisivi, that's the name of what was the Discoteca di Stato, is a fantastic archive in Italy, in Rome, is doing a great job, but it is not as used as it should be. It's not as famous as it should be. So I'm going to say it loud. Istituto Centrale per i Beni Sonori Audiovisivi is a very important institution that we have, and we should support as much as we can. And they are the ones who have all the songs, and they helped us to create the project. And yeah, it's difficult to define what is this archive. What can this archive do? What is the voice of the the racialized people, of the subaltern, even though it's so present, it's not there, right? And but that doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. And I think it's sort of like my ethical duty to try to do it if I really want to think about the colonial experience from the point of view of music. And find a way to discuss it. Maybe they're not the perfect ways, we can talk about it, but find some ways. And I'm a very big fan of what Ida Danowit wrote a few years ago. She was reflecting on how the moaning and the empathy that Europeans often show and feel when it comes to migrants, when it comes to discourse of a migration, even though these feelings and these expressive ways are based on humanity, they tend to hide the historical connections that actually created the contemporary migration. They generated it, created the basis for it, right? So somehow I think that my work is to talk about historical connections first. Or not first, we have to talk about it if we really want, as Italian society at least, if we wanted to move forward. So that's why I'm not a big fan of being offended and all the scandal that is often created around Faccetta Nera, because that also gives an instrument to whatever wants to provoke, right? But it's also not understanding that if we want a communal understanding, communal way to talk, a communal way to live together, we have to deal with the past. And the music gives a chance to deal with the past, I guess. At least this is what I'm trying to do. Can I tell a little story? So you mentioned that I was working at the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago. That was a great experience in my life. I had the good fortune to spend some time with Samuel Floyd before he passed away. And one time he told me this story. I wasn't doing this at the time. So he said this story that there was a white scholar who was starting the minstrel shows, right? And he went to Samuel Floyd. Samuel Floyd was one of the prominent black music scholars in the 80s and 90s mainly, right? And so this white professor went to him and asked him, I'm doing this work on coon songs and minstrel shows. Does it offend you? And he said, being the genius that it was, he said, oh, not at all. I'm glad that you are doing this crap and not me. So I use this story to say I consider myself somebody who listened to Samuel very carefully, and also to these little stories, even though it's not as famous as his books. But I think what he was teaching at that point is that there is work to do, and I'm trying to do it.
I would say let's open up questions to the audience, and then in the Q&A, I think feel free. I think Gianpaolo, you will be answering most of the questions, but Cliff and Emilio, if you have thoughts, don't hesitate to jump in. So I guess we will take questions from our audience.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for bringing this archive to light. So I'm assuming that the reason why most of these songs were about Tigray and Ethiopia generally was because that's where most of the battles were taking place during the war. I'm wondering, were there also songs coming out during this time about Eritrea? And was the nature of the songs similar? Were they different, given that Eritrea was already established as an Italian colony? Was the way they talked about Eritreans different from how they talked about Ethiopians? Were they all collectively referred to as Abyssinians, or was there a distinction between how Eritreans were referred to since they were part of an Italian colony? I'm really curious to hear more about that. I know there was that one lyric about Eritrean askaris, but just curious if you've come across Eritreans referred to in Italian music. Not
in this repertoire, I must admit. This is I should probably go back and then see. Maybe there is something, but I might be making an assumption now. But the discourse was all about Ethiopia because the media, the propaganda, the whole idea was going and conquer Ethiopia, revenge Adwa, right? So the Eritrea was sort of like the Eritrean country was not considered in this discussion, or apart from the idea of Eritrean Askaris, so somebody who is fighting with us. I do remember a song about a Somalian woman though. The name is Banane Jalle. And actually, Jabba Shego also wrote something about the song, how it happened to her that at one point she was at a bus stop and somebody asked her, "Where are you from?" And she said, "I'm actually from Italy, but my family is from Somalia." And this person started to sing the song, and I found it very both funny and scaring, but at the same, yeah, I can think about that song for Somalia, but for Eritrea, not on top of my head. No.
Hi, thank you so much. I have 3 points. First of all, I was very surprised by how many women, female voices were present, singing songs hypersexualizing women from Abyssinia. So that's something that I never noticed before. So thank you for showing us that. Then a question about so you talked a lot about the content of these songs and maybe a bit less about the singers. Were these singers, authors of these songs also present in the colony, or their lyrics were just based on information they heard from people that went? They were paid by the fascist propaganda machine. So I want to know more about how these lyrics come together. And then about the music after fascism, you said that some of the singers narrated their relationship with the music that they were producing under fascism after it was over. So did they ever challenge that content? Did they put maybe in a better light the people, the subject that they were narrating through the songs? And finally, to touch on the moderators' point regarding production of currently of Italian songers or second generation Italians of songs related to colonialism or post-colonialism. I struggle to identify any, but what surprised me recently was seeing Giovanotti, who's is probably the most mainstream singer that I know, who was in Eritrea to shoot a video for one of his songs called Chiaro di Luna. And this Chiaro di Luna is basically shot entirely in Asmara, and one of the reasons why he went to Eritrea to shoot the videos because his grandfather was there, and he wanted to go back and see what it looked like, based on the stories that he heard from his grandfather. So it is really striking how much of that colonial past is present in Italy in many families, but very little amount of people talk and share about that. And also interesting that in Eritrea it's so difficult for Westerners to go and shoot videos, and the fact that for Giovanotti was so easy is also like because of that past, that connection, and that relationship that he had with his past, basically. So thank you for that. And
wow, thank you very much. I didn't know about Giovanotti shooting a video in Asmara, in Eritrea. It's really interesting. I want to know more about it. But it's good that such a well-known figure talk about the past of his grandfather. This is not happening as much as it should, based on the fact that many of us have parents or grandparents, well, mostly grandparents, who had that experience. So that's this is maybe some sort of hope. Let's put it this way. To your questions, so most of the people who were writing didn't have direct experience or singing for sure, but didn't have direct experience of the colonies. They were not in the colonies, and as a matter of fact, they were often using some sort of vague narratives or some sort of colonial stereotypes, right? If you think about, well, I always think about Faccetta Nera in that sense, because it starts out and says, if you look at the sea from the plateau, there is no plateau in Ethiopia where you can look at the sea. So he's already wrong. And but in Eritrea, right? But in Eritrea, that's right. That's a good point. But it's not Abyssinia, right? But anyway, so what was that? Mainly the singers were doing this as part of their work. So there was not that we can really track down. Maybe some songs were desired or more pushed by the propaganda. One of this is Ti saluto vado in Abyssinia. We have some sources of composers who were composing songs, publishing with their own little publisher company, and bring them to some gerarca, some sottoministro, some whoever they could reach. So probably it was the other way around, where like musicians trying to cash in within this system that was coming out at the time. Definitely was not only or not mainly a propaganda system. And I think there was one more question. Oh, what did they do after that? Then they tried to put under the carpet many of what they did. I can think of a case which is interesting. So Nisa, who was the author of a couple of these songs, afterwards, like the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, started working with Renato Carosone. Renato Carosone was a famous Italian piano player. He used to play accordion and a singer. And he spent a lot of time in Eritrea and in Ethiopia as a musician up until 1944. And then he became famous with some songs that were using stereotypes and characterizing the other. I can think about l'Americano, Tuo fare Americano is a case, Torero, what is the song? The Caravan Petrol, yes, that's one I was thinking about. So somehow Nisa used that experience to shape these songs, and these songs were very successful at that time. Also as a way to bring the big musical ability from Renato Carosone was using swing and using many different, I would say, African American musical languages, and that's a case I can think of. But other than that, the other case is Ruccioni, who wrote the music from Faccetta Nera. He became later famous for his participation to Sanremo. He actually won Sanremo with one of his songs. So pretty much Nisa is the only case I can think about.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's fine? I'm good?
Sure.
Huh, okay. Here I So your taxonomy is not only lyrics-based, but I think it's also, since it's so thematic, I think it puts the spot on the overt intention of the, it kind of very much puts into the spot the ideological lens through which the authors want to look at their colonial experience. So I'm wondering what space in your research have the perhaps less overt aspect. I'm thinking of a presentation we had here long ago. It was over 10 years ago. Isabella Bonizio, I think, was the name of the research. And she came to talk about, I think it was Libya. One of the songs she examined was, for instance, O Tripolino Napolitano by Raffaele Viviani. Yeah. And so, you know, one of the themes that she was talking about was precisely where, you know, it was not uncharacteristical for the colonial experience that, you know, then there is this warping phenomenon, so that you then, this kind of sense of, you know, you can negotiate this experience of subalternity, of perceived subalternity, through the colonial experience. So there is the Napoletano Tripolino, etc. So I was wondering if other non-overt aspects were emerging from the lyrics. And by the way, this song is perhaps one of the predecessors of the Carosone style that you were mentioning, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And also, because the taxonomy is lyrics-centered, I was wondering also, in a similar vein, if there were other kind of drifting aspects that where the colonial song is more sucked into, you know, the song that you actually played at the beginning from the trio Lescano, which is, by the way, not simply a trio of foreigners, but 3 Jewish foreigners. Right. So it seemed to contain some exotic suggestions, musically speaking, right? So I'm wondering whether you encountered in the music you examined also a similar phenomenon of drifting of the music into exotism in a musical sense. You know, again, I'm thinking of other musical figures that perhaps have done so more deliberately. Gavino Gabriel is perhaps the most important name, the other founder of the Discoteca di Stato that you mentioned. But perhaps on the level of the canzoni that you examined, if you noticed whether, you know, the occasion of writing this type of songs could also be the occasion for writing not only in jazz direction, but also in other type of exotic, musically speaking, exotic direction. So not so much the lyrics, but the musical material. Okay, thank you.
There is one song I can think about. The name is Carovana del Tigray, where there is an attempt both to bring in the song definitely some jazz arrangement, but also there is this melody at the beginning that is playing with some, I would say, some Arabic mode or the harmonic scale, something in between. It was just playing on that. And I can think about some solos, musical solos that go more into that direction, also to come out to characterize even more the exotic elements. How much of that was being deliberate, this is difficult to say, but again, it was a realm for some sort of innovation, some new experiments. So I will assume that it was intentional. To the other part of your question, as you were talking about, I was thinking about a few songs that are in dialect. And I'm not thinking about the main dialects, like Roman dialect or Neapolitan dialect. There are songs that also use other characteristic dialects of Italy. And those are the songs that also try to talk about the experience of the soldiers from the bottom, I would say, right? Because they narrate how they are on the big boat, on the ship, how they are on the train, how they talk together, how they cook. I don't remember if they go as far as talking about an encounter. That would be interesting, right? And I'm just going to go back and look for it, like maybe, because from the intersectional point of view, that would be really interesting. Those songs that talk more from the working class point of view, people who were forced to go there, even they probably don't want to, or they didn't even know what to do about it. But yeah, but like I said, I cannot remember. I don't think there are also this kind of situation, but I will look for it, and maybe something will come out.
I lived in Italy during the last 6 years of fascism, and I remember workers in the fields singing some of the songs that you talked about today, and in particular Faccetta Nera. I think, though, that many of the songs that I heard were cleansed of overt racism, and probably because the town in which I lived was not far from Caserta, which was the most anti-fascist city of Italy. But the result, though, has been insidious, because I've lived most of my life under the illusion of Italians being brava gente, and until I was disabused of the notion by a friend who taught the history of fascism at Columbia. Were these, was the cleansing practiced in other parts of Italy?
Or that the song was sung everywhere and everybody was putting new words? Absolutely. We have so many different versions of the song. Actually, in 1974, around Caserta, was a beautiful version of the song with other words was recorded by ethnographers, ethnomusicologists. It was Rudy Assuntino and Diego Carpitello who recorded that. And the song talks about the colonial experience from the point of view of the soldier who is coming back only to find his mother who is sick and is going to die. A Benevento è nata in un mistero, dall'Africa soldata è tornata, trovata mamma a casa sta malata, e non chi la soldata come chiagneva, chiamava mamma sua non rispondeva. This is all we have. But this is to say that also the same melody was used a lot to present other perspectives. Some of them were overtly anti-fascist, some of them you can even say anti-racist. So thanks a lot for remembering that.
Well, just to put some female voice in the mix, I had the opportunity of speaking with a Tigray woman, an elderly Tigray woman, some years ago, and asked her about her feelings of the occupation. And she said there was some interest, there was some attraction between the local Ethiopian women and the soldiers, but the Tigray men put an end to that quickly by leaving some dead Italian soldiers in the town squares. So it is interesting, these songs that came out clearly from people who weren't there and had a very romanticized version of what happened.
Yeah. Absolutely.
David, you're going to hear our last question.
Yes. Okay, I'll try and make it short. I'm just very interested in the educational prospects of this project of yours. I mean, you're clearly not just constructing this archive to preserve the memory of these songs. You want to do something radical with it, if I've understood you. And I think that quotation from Ijaba Shego saying, these songs are in our collective culture now. What can we do to kind of resist them or create some context around them and awareness of them? And that seems to be a real challenge. And I just wanted to ask you about how much of a kind of history of the colonial project you need to bring in to make particularly teenagers, children, understand these songs with some kind of framework. If I can just say, what seems to be repeated in song after song is a removal, rimozione, kind of putting aside what colonial project's all about, which, as Fanon always reminded us, is founded on violence. So while these songs are being popular in Italy, there's violent killing going on in Ethiopia, displacement of people, bombing, bombing of Red Cross hospitals, massacres. We know about that. So that what the songs don't talk about is what, in some ways, you have to bring into schools. And it's quite difficult to do that, I think, because there's, that thing Gianpaolo says wonderfully, these songs are very catchy, they're likable musically. So I just wanted to say, maybe one way into this is to try and take apart the mechanisms of the songs. The one you talk about very interesting ways in infantilization, that even the women aren't really objects of sexual desire, they're also infantilized, because the whole project is, we're going to protect you, proteggere is repeated, isn't it? We're going to liberate you, we're going to take you to Italy where you'll be safe from these men who are making you into slaves. But of course that deportation is an act of violence. It's actually an appropriation of the Ethiopian woman from her family, from her community, and taking her into a white Italy that she doesn't know. So that very operation of displacement is a kind of violent thing, but the song kind of sweetens that and makes it all about protecting this infant. And the other thing that's very striking is how many of these songs there are this use of the diminutive suffix. It's moretto, faccetta, gambette. So these people are turned into children who need some kind of protective framework around them. So the challenge is how to make your target audience, who might want to, listen to some of this archive, aware of how that operation works and what it's actually hiding. Anyway, I just think that's the real difficulty of working with an archive like this.
Yeah. By the way, even the way the songs have been framed with marcette, there's always this tendency. So this is a huge challenge, and I don't work in schools, and I know how schools, also from my experience, are very difficult, and how the colonial past is not part of our school programs. So this is also a big challenge. Yeah. Yeah. And so what I did so far is working with teachers. So I think the goal of this project should be approach teachers first, and then find a way to get to the students, especially because I will struggle myself to explain, and also to, I don't know, but okay. Nevertheless, I think students or young students are also able to understand that a song can be both, can be sweet, but can also be very, very violent in a way. But again, I was part of a conference last month of pedagogists, and we have some idea to bring together some focus group with teachers, because mainly the first challenge is working with teachers who don't have enough time, who don't have enough space, who are also suspicious about this kind of experiment. But I'm hoping that we can find a few students where we can also move forward with this.
Okay, if you have more questions, Gianpaolo, can you stick around for a few minutes for questions?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So, but we're gonna wrap it here, just out of respect for your time. Thank you all so much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. And we hope you have a great night.
Thank you very much.